The city was already awake when Jaime Lannister reached the last rise of the Rose Road, but it did not wake the way a house wakes, yawning and stretching and filling itself with the quiet business of morning. King's Landing woke like a harbor after a storm, all clangor and clammy light, folk moving because they must, stepping around puddles of night filth that glistened as if they were coins beyond reach. The bells of Baelor were tolling tierce, a slow iron heartbeat rolling over rooftops and alleyways, over the broken backs of old houses, and Jaime felt each stroke along the hinge of his gold hand, as if the metal remembered what the flesh had forgotten. He drew rein upon the ridge where the road dipped down between vineyards and stony pasture and looked over the sprawl of the city. The air was thick with smoke from 1,000 cook-fires and the faint sourness of the river, and there beneath it all lay the old stink that no bell could wash away. Tanner's piss, fish turned too long in the sun, the breath of the crowd. The Red Keep lifted its pale mass over all, delicate as a queen's diadem from this far, though he knew its angles and courtyards to be hard and cramped within. He had grown up inside those walls and could smell them even now, oiled leather and cold marble, the dust of long corridors that burned the nose on dry days. He tried to remember if the keep had ever seemed clean when he was young, when he still believed kings and oaths and sisters all meant one simple thing.
Sir.
Adam Marbrand's voice came from his left. He had ridden the last league beside Jaime without speaking, perhaps thinking of the same bells. "Do we go on?" "We do." Jaime put his heels to his horse and they went down together into the flow of carts and donkey sledge, the cries of hawkers, the press that swallowed the last measure of wind and sky. Men saw the crimson cloak and made way, grudging and quick, eyes slipping off the gold that caught the light at Jaime's wrist with a glare like molten bread. He flexed the joint within the cuff, feeling the workings click against the nerve phantom of his missing hand. It had been some time since he had wished for the old hand back as a man might wish for a lost dog. The gold one would do, had done, a counterweight, a threat, a jest. But there were mornings when the bells of Baelor fell on it like a hammer, and then it was nothing but a reminder that he had once been more than a Lannister sigil hammered into shape. People spoke his name as he passed, or thought they did and swallowed it. Kingslayer, Oathbreaker, Lannister, Lord Commander, came out of them like the smell of stale ale. He rode through it and kept his eyes upon the hill where the sept shimmered in the rising light, white marble like a promise made at a bedside by a woman who was not yet a mother. He had not seen the sept at this hour since he was a boy trailing after his father to some investiture or after his sister to some spectacle. Now it seemed to lean toward him as if it, too, had a prayer to whisper. They took the street of the sisters, the slope steep enough that the horses set themselves to it with care, hooves clinking on uneven stone. A pair of warriors' sons barred their path just short of the square before the sept, spears crossed with a scrape like whetstone. They had the look of poor men who had traded one hunger for another, ribs beneath mail, eyes full of bread and judgment. "Who comes?" one demanded. "Adam Marbrand," said Adam dryly. "And Ser Jaime Lannister, Lord Commander of the Kingsguard." The spears lifted after a glance that was not quite a flinch. "You'll want the High Septon Lords. He's within." "I'll want my sister," Jaime said, surprising himself with the sound of his own voice. It was calm, as if he had stopped upon some threshold and set down all the weight of the road to cross it unencumbered. "But I suppose I must ask the High Septon to loan her back to me." The warrior of the two, a square-headed man with a broken tooth that winked when he spoke, chewed this and dared a look at Jaime's golden hand. "She hath chosen trial by combat," he said, putting scriptural cadence on the words, "and so belongs to the judgment of the seven, the High Septon." His eye flicked to Adam's hilt and away again. "We'll see you." Jaime nodded and swung down. The square felt close despite its breadth. The stairs of the sept rose like a slope of snow, each step worn by 1,000, 10,000 feet. The doors stood open, shadows pooled beyond them in the nave. Lamps burned within though the day was already bright, thin flames that made little suns in hanging glass. Septas in ash-gray drifted past like moths. A blind man knelt against a pillar with his hand open on the stone, as if waiting to cup a tear that never fell. Jaime crossed the threshold and the smell of incense caught the back of his throat. Rose, frankincense, a bitter root he could not name. He had never loved the smell. Covered too much. They found the high septon where men had said he would be, not enthroned but on the steps before the mother's altar, speaking softly to a woman with a face like a wind-cracked wall and a jar of lye soap held hard against her stomach. When he saw Jaime, the high septon ended with a benediction that was mostly a smile. It made his beard seem less like a broom and more like moss clinging to an old stone. He rose with care. He did not bow. "Lord Commander," he said, "how the road favors you." "It was long," Jaime replied, "but I find myself where I am needed." The gods bring men where they must be, if they are willing to use the road underfoot rather than a ladder braced upon another man's wall, the high septon said. "Your sister has asked the judgment of the seven. It is an old custom, older than many men remember. We will honor it." "My sister has named a champion," Jaime said. He tasted the words. They were simple. They had a weight, too. Everything in this city now had a weight if you tipped it on your tongue. "She has named me." The high septon's eyes went to the golden hand then, and only then. It did not seem to trouble him. He looked into Jaime's face with the quiet of a man looking into a basin to see if yesterday's rain had settled clear. "She has. You are her kin. That is a heavy cup to lift, Lord Commander. To be the sword that may, in truth, be the noose." Jaime thought of the letter he had burned in the Riverlands, the way the parchment had twisted like a moth in the fire and the ink had gone from black to brown to nothing. Cersei had begged then. He had watched the plea become smoke as if by doing so he put an end to the shape it could take in his life. Yet he had come when the bells spoke her name in his dreams night after night. He had come upon a road that wore his patience down to the metal of his bones. He had come to be the sword. He said, "Let the cup be mine." The high septon nodded. "And so it is." He lifted a hand. It was not soft, this hand, not in the least. Years of scrubbing pots and steps had given it the look of something carved and worn by use. "Your sister will be brought forth to witness the naming. You will take water and salt in the sight of the seven, to swear, and the accuser will set forth his champion too." His. The word slipped. Jaime was tired enough that words came out of him without a courtier's sieve. "Who?" "One of your maids of the warrior's sons." The high septon did not smile. He did not take offense. "A son, yes, a sinner, as we are all sinners, but one who has set his face toward the light and borne penance. A kinsman of yours, by a road less direct than yours to the queen." Something turned inside Jaime, a slow wheel. "Lancel," he said, before he could stop himself. He pictured a boy in yellow silk, hair like pale straw, mouth eager and slippery with promises. He pictured the same boy after the Blackwater, corpse pale and sweating on a bed that smelled of vinegar and fear. Then another picture rose to replace them both. A gaunt young man with a rope belt knotted around a tunic, eyes like bare candle flames. "You mean to put him in mail and send him to the mother's feet?" "The boy put himself beneath the seven's eyes," the high septon said, "and he made a vow. There is a strength that hunger gives us. There is another that forgiveness gives. Do not scorn either, Lord Commander, not in your heart. You may need both before we are done." "I have a hand of gold," Jaime said. "It buys more than hunger and forgiveness, I've found." "Then buy bread for your men who have no gold," the high septon said, "and light a candle for your sister, if you will. There is time yet. The combat will be held on the third day from this, when the moon is 3 nights shaven. The city must be told. The square must be set. People have a need to see justice when it is done, though none of us are ever so foolish as to think ourselves its masters." He paused, and his look softened. "Go to her. She asked to see you. I thought to forbid it until the day, but I am an old man who forgets his own mind when it is in danger of cruelty." He led them down a side aisle where the pillars cast a forest of shade, then through a low door and into the cool that lived inside the sept no matter how the sun grew fat outside. A thick-armed septa with a mouth like a knife drew back a bolt. and another door opened onto a passage that smelled of lye, beeswax, women. Jaime had walked this corridor once in boyhood to see a maiden aunt who had taken vows and then taken fever. He remembered the pattern of the tiles underfoot, white diamonds with chips along the corners. He remembered the feeling that the passage could go on forever if it pleased. Cersei's cell was plain in the way a winter field looks plain until you kneel and see the hundreds of stalks that are stubble there. A narrow bed, a stool, a jug, a bowl. A window little bigger than the spread of a man's hand, with iron across it. Cersei stood with her back to that slit, so that the light turned her hair to wires of copper and made her face a pale, flat thing. When she turned, she ceased to be a flat thing. Her eyes were green as broken glass, and she had lain awake enough nights to crush the dreamer in them to dust. She was barefoot. Her heel left a small crescent on the stone where she had shifted her weight again and again. "You came," she said. Her voice was steady until the last letter of the word, which broke like sugar under a knife. Jaime closed the door behind him and sent the scepter away with a glance that made her swallow. And then it was just them and the smell of the lime wash on the walls and the old scent that had always clung to Cersei's wrists no matter what perfume she used. Something like apple skin warmed beneath a cloak. He wanted to take her hands and did not quite. He had not held them since he had stood in a drafty pavilion at Riverrun and watched a letter burn. "I came," he answered. Her mouth moved, small, a woman's mouth, and he remembered it at 12, at 15, at 5 and 20, laughing when she ought not have laughed. "I knew you would," she said. "After all that foolishness in the Riverlands. You frightened me, you know. I thought." The word hung without a shape to land upon. She had never been good at speaking fear. She had always preferred to give orders to fear, and to men. "It does not matter now. It matters that you are here. They are going to dress you in paper oaths and send you into the square to fight this mockery of justice in front of ragpickers. How they love their shows, the small folk. Will you see the stones they throw at me if you fail? Will you hear them call me whore? Will you?" He looked at her without blinking. "If I fail, I will not hear anything." She smiled with a little flash of teeth. "Oh, I suppose not. Then you had best not fail." She stepped closer, and for a moment she was not queen or mother or monster. She was a woman who had grown up inside the same walls as he had done. She looked at the gold that caught at the light when he lifted it. "Does it weigh much?" "Less than you would think. More than I like. You will manage." Her eyes cut away, over his shoulder to the corner where the bowl sat. "They made me wash with lye when I was brought here. Their hands were rough as brushes. They left marks I never let even you make upon me." She said it as if it were a fact of weather. The corner of her mouth trembled. "Jaime, they mean to put Lancel in the other circle." He should not have been surprised, she knew. The sept was a sieve with more gossip in its pores than incense. "So I have been told." Her fingers found his sleeve and pinched it as if to feel the weave. "You will kill him, and that will be an end to it. It will be the gods' will. He is a poor thing, and I have done with pity. You will kill him." "Cersei," he said. He closed his eyes a heartbeat and opened them again. "He is our kin, and I am your sister." She let the words fall like stones from a pocket. "Do you waver? The Kingslayer has grown tender since he lost his pretty fingers. What will you do, Jaime, if he falls to his knees and prays for your mercy? Will you give it and give me to the knives instead? The gods love a fool. They love a martyr better." "I will fight him," Jaime said. "I will fight him as if he were anyone else. That is what I can promise. And win." She watched him. When he did not answer, she drew a breath that lifted her shoulders with a little shiver of cloth. "Win." He remembered a girl in a green mantle, hair loose as a vow cut free, slipping into his bed by a privy door when they were too young to think about anything but the shape of each other's shoulders in the dark. He remembered a woman with a wine cup in her hand watching a boy king strut, and the same mouth curved, the same eyes, and a shadow out of a story resting on her like a veil. He said, "I came to win." She reached up and touched his face with the back of her knuckles in the way she had when they were children, as if he were some feverish boy who must be cooled. "Good," she said. and the word shook again, so lightly that it might have been the floor or the air. Go and do what you were made to do. He wanted to say that he had been made to do something else once, that he had been made, perhaps, to be a knight, a brother, a man who could hold something as simple as an oath and not let it slide. But her hand fell away and took the moment with it. He turned because there was nothing in the room to stay for that would not become a fight, and he had one of those already waiting. Outside, Adam was a square block of patience in the corridor. I have a place set aside for you in the Red Keep, he said, and a yard that is not entirely full of innocent eyes if you mean to swing a sword for a few hours. I do, Jaime said. Find me the mute man. Adam's mouth shaped a question and then closed on it. Ser Island is in the city. I made it my business to send word when we crossed the Blackwater. The yard they found was the same yard where boys had fought with staves and practice blades when Jaime was young, though the fountain was gone and a line of jars sat where the old lime tree had made a little shower of shade in summer. The jars were full of sand, and they held up the pikes the new guards drilled with when the sun was at its hottest. Jaime took the wooden sword that had been left hanging from a peg and turned it in his left hand. It was smooth as bone. The grip had been worn into the shape of too many other men's hands. He felt a flare of sudden dislike for it, as if the thing had made itself traitor by being so ready to fit anyone else. Ser Island came like a piece of the yard that had pulled free. He was not taller than Jaime had been at 17 and not heavier than a barrel of fish that had gone half to rot. He had no tongue, no courtesy, nothing but the slow blink of his pale lashes and the mean joy that came to him when steel met steel. Jaime had learned to value that joy in the months after he got the golden hand, when all other joys had seemed to have been picked off the hedges and thrown onto a cart with the windfalls. They went to it without words. The first hours were all footwork, the circle of the yard, the pivot on the left heel, the catch and slip with the gold, which he used like a buckler against the thrusts Island aimed at his ribs and throat. The sun burned down and the stone gave it back. Sweat ran into his eyes so that the world became a bright blur, then a darker one as clouds went over and a wind came by smelling of the river and dead eel. He heard Adam speaking somewhere as if from beneath a door and Ser Boros laughing in the corridor beyond with a noise like a dog choking on a bone. He shut them both out and watched the silver wink that was Island's blade. He thought of Lancel's wrist, narrow as a girl's, of the way a sword would feel biting there. A dozen times he was too slow. A dozen times he was perfect, and there was no one to see it but a man who could not speak. When the wooden sword cracked, he did not drop it. He turned the crack inside his hand and let it bite, and drove forward on a gout of anger that was part at himself and part at the bells, the bells, the bells. When at last he made the old man's point go wide and felt the jolt in his shoulder that said he had found the moment, he did not take it. He froze where he stood and saw, beyond the tip of Ser Island's blade, the green of Cersei's eyes and the pallor of Lancel's skin. A breath and he lowered the point. Island showed his teeth. They were small and gray. He gestured with his sword and came on, and Jaime let him. They kept at it until shadows had lengthened like spilled ale across the stones, and the yard had begun to smell of the day's heat cooling. Jaime's left arm trembled and the stump inside the gold hand burned. He had not eaten since dawn. He did not feel hunger. There would be time for that in the night when he had no use for it. Enough, he told Island. The old knight bowed with the irritability of a man who had wanted another 10 strokes and went away like a crab backing into its hole. Jaime sat on the steps with the sword laid across his knees and watched the line of ants climbing the wall where the lime tree had been. In some other life, the tree would still be there. In some other life, a woman would be sitting upon the step above him with her foot nudging his shoulder. In this life, he had a square of dirt that would soon be a circle of sand and 2 lives balanced upon it like coins on a thumb. Adam came to him carrying a flagon and 2 cups. Wine, he said. Maidens. The red keeps the dust down. Jaime took the cup in his gold and poured with the left. You have been watching boys fight here since before I grew into armor, he said. Tell me if any of them turned into men. Adam drank. Some did. And the rest? Some died in beds, Adam said, and some became men the wrong way and should have died sooner. Ah! Jaime rinsed his mouth and spat. Then we are all ahead of the game. He lay in his old chamber that night, a room washed and swept and utterly unlike the place where he had once slept with his armor on, because he had believed that to take it off would make him soft as pastry. The moon poured its silver across the floor and the city side beyond the glass. Somewhere, a woman wept, a door shut, a dog barked once and lay down. He closed his eyes and saw the square, saw it as he remembered it upon other mornings, flower-laden at a royal wedding, black with people at an execution, rolling with a rumor like a ship in a swell. He saw a circle marked upon it, chalk or sand or rope. In that circle he saw Lancel kneel with his head bent and his hair grown long and poor. He saw his own body, one knee in the dust, his gold hand lifted to catch a stroke he could not see the end of. He slept at last and dreamed that he was a boy again, and that the lime tree in the yard had 100 bells hung in its branches and all of them were ringing, and that when he reached up to steady them, they cut his palm and his mouth filled with leaves. He woke with the taste of bile and a prickling at the base of his neck that was not fear, not entirely. Somewhere in the keep, a rat ran across a shelf and knocked a plate to the floor. The sound it made when it broke was indecently loud. Jaime sat up and put both feet to the cold stone and waited for his breath to find him again. On the morning of the second day, he went to see the Boy King. Tommen was in his solar with the sun pouring in as if it had personal affection for him. He had grown taller while Jaime was away. His legs were too long for the stool he sat upon. His feet hooked awkwardly against the lower rail. Ser Balonswan stood behind him with a look of polite but firm absence that the Kingsguard wore as if it had been part of their uniform since the Undulls. Marjorie's perfumed ladies had left a bowl of pears on the table, and Tommen had eaten 3 without seeming to notice it until he reached for the 4th and found there were no more. "Uncle," he said when he saw Jaime. The hope that lit his face made something ugly uncurl inside Jaime's chest and roll over to show its white belly. "You came back. I knew you would. Marjorie said you would. She said good uncles always come back." "I am not sure I meet that standard," Jaime said. "But here I am." Tommen's mouth flattened a little with thought. "Mother is... They will let her fight?" "They will let her watch me fight," Jaime said. "That is the custom." "I wanted to go," Tommen blurted, then looked down, ashamed as if he had made a request for sugared figs at a funeral. "I wanted to go and say that I forbade it, but they said the faith is old and above the king and that it is the god's business if a queen fights or not. They tell me what I can do, uncle. I am the king and they tell me." "Some things are older than kings," Jaime said, "and some men who whisper such things only learned to count last winter." Tommen's mouth twitched again. He was trying not to smile. "I do not like this," he said in a rush. "I do not like that mother must be there and that men will shout at her and that you must hold a sword and Lancel cousin." He glanced up as if he had startled himself with the name. "Is it true?" "It is true," Jaime said. "Do not kill him," Tommen whispered, and then louder, "Do not die." Jaime moved to the window and looked down at the square as if it were some map that could be read differently if one tilted it. The Sep's white steps were being scrubbed by old women with even older brushes. Straw had been piled at the feeders for the city horses, and hungry men had gathered there pretending to be hungry horses. The light was lean and sharp. "I will do what must be done." "That is not what I asked," the boy said, so quiet that Jaime almost did not hear him. "It is what I can promise," Jaime said. He turned and touched the boy's shoulder with his golden hand. It had rarely felt so foolish to him. He said softer, "You are not your brother. Do not let them make you think you must be." Joffrey would have wanted to watch. Joffrey would have laughed at the wrong moments. He would have asked for heads no matter how the gods answered. You will want to hide under your bed to keep from hearing anything, and you will force yourself to listen instead. That is a better kind of bravery. I will remember that you found it. Tommen's eyes filled with tears, large and unashamed as a child's tears, which is what they were. "I do not know how to be king," he said. "Neither did I," Jaime said before he could stop himself, and that made the boy crack a wet smile and sniff. "Get up. Eat something that is not a pear." He ate bread with honey in another corner of the keep and found Qyburn in a corridor afterward like a shadow that had learned a trick with candles. The man bowed and smiled and smelled of clean linen with something darker beneath, as roses smell of earth if you strip them of their leaves. "Sire," Qyburn said, with the air of delivering a thought that had been sitting in its wrapping for hours. "There are other champions to be had, if the press of sentiment proves inconvenient. We have friends that need no food. We have swords that do not tire." "I know who you mean," Jaime said. He did not trouble to keep the disgust from his face. "And I know what he is." Qyburn's eyes did a small, bright dance. "He is a knight in armor. That is what most men will see. What men see and what men know are not always the same," Jaime said, thinking of a stag upon a golden field, and a dead man in a bed, and a shadow with a face. "I will do this. Tell your silent knight to stay where he is." "As you wish." The maester who was not a maester bowed again and washed away into the tapestries, leaving the faintest trace of something like wet stone. Jaime slept little that night and less well. When morning came, it came without haste, and still it was too swift, light unfolding along the corridors as a knife unfolds out of a sleeve. In the yard, men were already at work hauling cartloads of sand. Someone had painted a circle upon a rough plank and brought it to Jaime as if to ask whether it was large enough to take a life. He told them it was. He ate nothing. Island came and they moved again until his shoulder sang like a thread pulled too taut, and then the bells began. They brought Cersei from the sept through the west door. She was not shorn this time, not naked. Someone had been wise enough to understand that the city had fed too often upon the flesh it despised, and that to feed it again would not produce justice, only more hunger. She wore green that made the green in her eyes look hard, and her hair had been drawn back so tightly that it smoothed the lines of her face to something almost girlish. Her mouth was that girl's mouth too, for a moment, rising at the corners. She did not look at the crowd except the way a queen looks at water when a servant pours it. The High Septon walked before her with a book cradled in both hands as if he meant to read to the stones. On the far side of the circle, the warriors' sons appeared with their champion between them. Lancel looked as if he had been assembled out of bone and resolve. The clothes upon him were plain. The mail lay upon that plainness like a net over a scaffold. His eyes were the eyes of a man who had made a bargain with himself and was keeping it. When he saw Jaime, he bowed his head a fraction, a breath. Then he looked down at the sword they had given him. It had not belonged to glory. It had belonged to a dead man's chest in a modest hall and had been hauled out, oiled, kissed, sworn upon. It would do. The crowd filled every place there was to stand, then filled the places where there was no room at all. They climbed onto each other as they had always done, turning themselves into scaffolds. They smelled of onions and wet stone and old smoke, of hope sharpened to meanness. Jaime stepped into the circle when the High Septon gestured and the sand shifted under his boot. He had thought the sand would feel like the sea. Somehow, it did not. It felt like being buried to the ankle in grit. "Water and salt," the High Septon said, offering the bowl with both hands. It rang softly when Jaime touched it, as if the water inside it were a bell also and was being woken to its duty. Jaime wet his lips and let the drops run down and tasted nothing. He put 2 grains of salt upon his tongue and grounded himself in their small, stubborn bitterness. He sank to one knee and swore to the 7, who had been given so many oaths they must be weary of the sound. He rose, and the gold of his hand flashed once in the sun, as if it had found something amusing and meant to share the joke. "Do you name him as your champion, Queen Cersei?" the High Septon asked. Her voice carried cleanly across the space. "I do." She did not look at Jaime when she said it. She looked at the crowd as if to say, See what it is to be me." They wanted to see. They always had. "And do you, good son, take up the sword for the faith?" Lancel's lips moved around a prayer that did not come out of his throat. He nodded. He drew. The sound of the blade leaving the scabbard was a scrape and then a freedom, no beauty to it and none needed. Jaime drew also, the wood of the grip warm under his left hand and his palm rough against it where the callus had grown as honest as a scar. He flexed his right so the joints moved, metal whispering against the leather lining. The world narrowed. The city became a smudge of brick and sound. His sister became a point of green at the edge of his sight. The sky was the color of a polished helm and just as blank. He did not think of oaths or of names. He thought of the point of Lancel's blade and the way the boy, no, the man, held himself too square, too rigid, the way a penitent stands when he expects the lash and hopes he deserves it. Jaime breathed once, twice, and stepped forward into the circle of sand. And the sound the crowd made then was like the intake of a great animal's breath right before the bite. "Begin," said the High Septon, and Jaime's feet were already moving, the sand giving and taking him. The sun glanced from the gold and into Lancel's eyes, the first stroke falling from left to right not as a blow but as a question. Lancel answered. Their swords met with a sound like two churchmen thumping their books on a table to disagree better. And then there was no room for bells or breath or names. There was only steel, and the circle they had both stepped into, and the weight of the day pressing down upon both their shoulders as if the gods themselves leaned over the balcony to watch. Steel slid and rasped. A pair of fish knives tested against each other. Nothing graceful in it because there was no one to admire grace, only a city waiting for blood to carry it through the heat. Lancel's first cuts were spare and book-taught, a catechism of the blade. High guard, middle, low, and a thrust threaded where a prayer might go if a priest had more courage. Jaime let the first two scrape his edge, felt the third knock on the gold, felt the shock enter the cuff and travel up to the stump with a bite that was not pain and yet reminded him of pain. He took a step to his right and another forward, and in that movement was an old habit born anew, the way a dancer refines a floor under a different floor, tried and proved beneath the sand. Lancel had learned to keep his feet narrow to conserve strength. He had learned to keep his elbows in. He had learned not to watch the sword but the man. Good. Someone had drilled him. Someone had made a hungry creature obey a line. There was no hunger like the hunger that had a purpose and a god to bless it. Jaime knew that, though he had rarely had gods willing to help. He fought as he had learned to fight left-handed, with the blade as question and the hand of gold as answer, letting the weight of the metal do what the old flesh had done for him without thought. He gave Lancel a cut to chew on at the shoulder and saw the boy man take it with a hiss and an adjustment rather than a wince. The male drank the stroke like bad wine, and still some of it went through. He saw it go through by the way Lancel's jaw tightened. He might have said, "Yield." He did not. Not yet. There are words you say because you wish them to be true. There are others you say because you need them to be false until the last possible breath. He heard Cersei's voice as if it had been pressed into the iron around his wrist. "You will kill him." He put the thought away. He kept his eyes upon the blade and upon Lancel's eyes beyond it and upon the shadows that moved where feet moved around the circle. All those eyes were part of the fight now, whether he wanted them or not. The crowd made a sound. A long, low sound like a ship's hull feeling its weight. And then there were voices in it, all the old market voices made raw. Lannister, Lannister, Faith, Queen, Murderer. Gods be with him, gods blind them. Someone laughed, high and bright and out of place, and then stopped when a warrior's son turned his head and looked, and the laugh fell like a dropped cup and did not break because the sand took it. Lancel came again, fewer questions this time, more answers. He drove at Jaime's thigh and then at his ribs, searching, not trying to split a man but to find the weakness in a box and worry it. He had been taught that a left-handed man is a mirror and that all you know becomes suspect. Jaime took the thrust for his ribs on the gold and turned it slightly, just so, letting the edge of Lancel's sword kiss the rim where the smith had made a lip that might have been ornament and was not. The Faith's blade skidded and bit and stuck for the beat of a heart. Jaime twisted, hard, and the metal screamed. Lancel wrenched free with a grunt that was more rage than pain, and the next stroke came wild. Jaime did not meet it. He let it spend itself upon air and stepped inside and drove with his shoulder. Mail kissed mail. He felt the hollow of Lancel's breastbone through two shirts and a skin of piety. The boy, no, the man, went back 3 steps and kept his feet because he had learned to fall and not fall. They were both panting now. Jaime could hear his breath echoing in the cup of his hand, harsh and mechanical, as if some other creature. A bellows, a smith's toy, were doing his living for him. Lancel's breath had a rattle deep in it, the remnant of an old pain left by the Blackwater bolt. Jaime could hear the ghost of it. He had not forgotten what men's bodies remember when men try to forget. The sand was churned now to a dirty yellow paste. The sun pressed upon the back of Jaime's neck. The gold was hot. The leather beneath was hotter. He had trained for hours in the yard for this hot. Still, this was hotter because the city put its breath upon the fight, and it was a sour breath. "Do you pray?" Lancel asked, sudden as a thrown stone between strokes. "Not with the sword in my hand," Jaime said. "You should," Lancel said. He came on. Jaime met him, and the second meeting of their blades was not tidy. It was not meant to be. There is a point in any fight where both men consent to the ugliness because nothing else will finish it. Lancel's crude strength was the strength of a body burnt lean by fasting and remade by work with the pick and the cudgel. He put that strength into the third cut, and it made a dull, heavy sound against Jaime's edge that traveled through the wood of the grip and the bone and the breath. Jaime's reply was a thrust meant to touch, not pierce, to leave a mark for the body to remember the way a hound remembers the hand that checked it. He saw blood bead through the rings at Lancel's hip and felt, somewhere within, the small lurch of acknowledgement that comes when the world obeys you in one thing. Beyond the circle, Cersei did not move. She had learned not to move where men could see. She kept her hands in their sleeves, long and green and calm, and she kept her chin lifted so that the light slid along the edge of her face like a blade that admired the thing it meant to cut. Inside her, the stillness was a lie. She was walking the length of her cell again and again, bare feet leaving crescents in the lime-whitened floor. She was on a cold bed hearing the whisper of wool and the scrape of a latch. She was at a window slit watching a bird build and unbuild a nest with a patience she did not possess. She had told Qyburn to keep the silent night in his dark place, and the telling had felt like throwing away a rope when the wind picks up and you can smell rain. Yet to send that thing, them, into the circle was to tell the whole city that she was done with the game of faces at last and would wear a skull from now on. She had chosen Jaime because she did not know what she might become without this last chance to be the woman she had been. She had chosen him because she wanted to win, and because winning by some other's monstrousness would make the victory a kind of wearing that even she could not bear. If he failed, if he died, she would take up the skull and crown it. She would. She said the words in her head and gave them a line as if saying them made them obedient. The High Septon watched with the fixed attention of a carver looking for the flaw that will become the face. He did not speak to the men who stood at his shoulder, but he put his heel down upon the hem of his robe so that he would remember the weight of cloth when men asked him later what the weight of the day had been. Once, when Lancel's sword scraped that lip of gold again and jerked and Jaime turned him, the old man's mouth made a small round O, the sound a teacher makes when a child makes two mistakes that cancel each other. On a balcony far above, Tommen was not supposed to be there. Ser Balon had done his duty and set men at the door, and Marjorie had done hers and folded a hand around Tommen's and led him down a corridor away from the noise. The boy had gone back by another way, a way known to cats and to kings once they are told it, a way that had a short stair smelling of dust and old linen and a door that stuck and a lock that did not. And now he stood on the extreme edge where the stone came to a point, and he gripped the crenellations with both hands until his knuckles went moonwhite. He peered down and tried to breathe without making sound. He was a good boy, and he could be quiet when he must. The circle looked small from where he stood, like a coin laid upon a table far below. He could tell one figure from the other by the gold that flashed, by the way his uncle moved like a man who knew the ground, and by the way Lancel cousin moved like a man who had learned to be careful. There was something wrong about that, Tommen thought. Uncle Jaime had always been the one he had seen doing careful things, careful with his jokes, careful with his eyes, careful about the way he put his hand upon Tommen's shoulder. Now he did not look careful. He looked hungry. Tommen pressed his lips together so hard that they ached and remembered to breathe. Below, sweat had turned the dust on Jaime's forearms to mud. He tasted iron where the air went in and out. He gave ground deliberately across a patch where the sand lay deeper. He put Lancel's next step there. The boy's foot sank that little, and he had to pull free, and in the pulling his blade came half a finger too wide, and that was enough. Jaime stepped, and the golden hand came up as if it had been struck, and the lip found the faith's edge again, and he wrenched, and when the blade came away, it came away with a small notch in it, and surprise in Lancel's face because he had not yet fought a man who could do that. Surprise eats all prayers. Jaime came left and made a little circle with his point and found the hollow at the inside of Lancel's elbow. A touch, a promise. Blood came there too, but less. It was enough to make a grip slipperier. It was enough to make the next parry that much slower. Yield, Jaime said then, for the first time low, so low that the words belonged to the space between them and to no other ears. Lancel's eyes flared. He choked on a word that might have been no and might have been a prayer. The warrior sees, Lancel said. The crone judges. The father is tired of us all, Jaime said and pressed. Steel rang in flat, ugly notes that did not carry. The crowd's NOI. Essie rose and fell in rags around them like a sail that has lost its stays. Jaime forced Lancel to turn again, drove him along the rim of the circle so that the sand gave unevenly and the boards beneath. There were boards beneath, a platform laid upon the square to raise the circle a handspan. Thudded where they gave and did not where a joist ran. The sound of that difference traveled up through boots and thighs and spine. Men who have fought a long time can hear the shape of the ground through their bones. Lancel had not fought a long time. He stepped into silence and did not hear it, and his weight was on the wrong foot, and Jaime took the line that opened and cut low, a sweep, forcing a jump. Lancel made it, his mail fluttering like coins on a beggar's chest, and landed badly, and then corrected, and then came at Jaime with something reckless in him, lit at last like a taper seized from the mother's altar and put to use at a poor man's hearth. The thrust came too straight. Jaime did not want to show the city a trick, and he did not want to offer the High Septon a thing to envy, and he did not want to give Cersei the sight she craved, the sight of him breaking another man in a way that could not be put back. He put the gold out and the blade slid again, and he closed, and his left hand went past Lancel's right and found the wrist and pressed, and the fingers opened and the sword fell. It clattered and 100 throats clucked in sympathy. Jaime did not kick it away. He did not need to. He had his edge under Lancel's chin, not enough to break skin, enough to tell skin what would happen if it argued. Yield, Jaime said again in the same voice. Lancel was very still, the way the body becomes when the choice is not for the body to make. He was looking past Jaime, up, beyond. His lips moved. Perhaps he was counting the spokes of the mother's star. Perhaps he was making a bargain with himself, as men do when they want to believe that the thing they cannot bear will be asked of them, and that they will be noble enough to answer. His throat worked. Jaime felt the movement of that swallow along the keen edge as a man feels fish take bait through a line. He could cut now without effort. He could let the gods decide by spilling a cup. He did not. I have sinned, Lancel whispered. So have we all, Jaime said, because the truth has a way of finding its moment like a fish finding a hook. I lay with, Lancel began, voice raw, and Jaime struck him across the mouth with the flat. It was not a hard blow. It did what it was meant to do. Take the words from him and make him swallow blood instead. Jaime leaned in until his forehead almost touched Lancel's and let the gold press the penitent's blade hand toward the sand. That is not for them, he said, and found himself surprised by the roughness of his own whisper. Do not give them what they want. Give me one thing. Yield. Lancel's eyes were very clear. For a breath, they were not a penitent's eyes at all. They were a boy's eyes, too large and empty of everything but the desire to please the person who wanted something from him. He stopped looking past Jaime. He looked at him. He nodded. The sound the city made then was unlike any sound Jaime had ever heard from it. Even at executions, even at weddings, the noise had always had a shape, a plan, a place to go. Here it went nowhere. It sprang up all around like hairs bursting from brush. 100 little shouts, a dozen sobs, laughter, curses that broke off like gutter ice. Some men cheered because they had wanted Lannister to live. Some men cheered because they had wanted a fight, any fight, and had got one. Some men cheered because they did not know what else to do with the noise in them. The warrior's sons closest to the circle had the look of hounds who have been called off meat. One of them took a step, checked, looked to the High Septon, found no order there, and swallowed his step like a man swallowing a small bone. By the old law and the mercy of the Father, the High Septon said, so steady that his voice cut through the ragged noise as a drawn bowstring cuts air. The gods have shown their will. The Queen's champion stands. The faith's champion yields. Let those who would dispute the gods dispute them with prayer, and those who would dispute men with men's tools lay those tools aside, lest they find their hands empty when they would eat. He took a breath in and out carefully, the way old men do when they pass something too heavy between their lungs. He lifted both hands. Enough! Cersei did not move until the word. When it came, she moved before anyone else could move at all, faster than her dress could consent, faster than her hair could follow. She was at the edge of the circle with her hands held out as if to receive some sacrament, and Jaime had a flash of childish memory. The two of them racing hand in hand down a corridor too narrow for two, and he almost smiled. He did not. The sand clung to his boots. He took 2 steps and then another, and their eyes were the only green things in the circle, and they met as if they had been magnets parted and left to starve. He did not kneel. He could not have got back up. She did not curtsy. No ceremony could carry what was in them, and so they spared ceremony, for once. "You did not kill him," she said, soft, astonished, the way a lady says there is rain when she has forgotten what rain is. "He yielded," Jaime said. Her mouth changed the way weather changes when wind shifts. "He yielded," she repeated, and there was something hungry in the repetition. Her fingers twitched as if they had a cup to lift and toast something with. "The gods have spoken. The gods have. The gods have let a man choose a smaller death," Jaime said. He did not want to break whatever this moment was. He had to set it where it belonged. "Do not make of it more than that. I will make what I will make," she said. And for an instant the girl went out of her face and the Queen came back, all corners and judgment. Then she looked past him at Lancel and the old hunger, the old acid rose. "He yielded," she said again, but this time there was no softness in it. "Take him." 2 warriors' sons stepped forward at a motion from one of their own, and they helped Lancel up. He swayed, blood at his elbow, blood at his mouth, and bowed his head when the High Septon held up a hand, and the High Septon looked at him a long moment as if reading what sins were written on the tops of his shoes and the backs of his hands, and then touched his brow with 2 fingers. It had the look of a father forgiving a child for breaking a bowl he cannot afford, because the bowl is gone either way and the child is not. Jars of water were brought. Someone fussed at Jaime with a cloth. He let them until impatience returned to him as its own kind of heat, and he brushed the hand away and wiped his own mouth with the back of his left hand and felt the grit grind against his lip. He turned without looking to see whether Cersei followed and made for the steps that had been cleared at the side of the platform, and an old woman thrust a twig of something at him as he passed, a sprig of withered something that might have been blessed at some doorway, and he took it because refusing would have meant stepping on her hand, and he did not want to feel old fingers break under his heel even in his mind. They were given a chamber not in the sept but near enough to smell it. A long, cool room with carved saints who kept their eyes upon the middle distance. Wine had arrived there before them. Jaime took a cup and found that his hand shook too much for the thing to be useful. He set it down and stared at his fingers until they steadied. Cersei took the cup he had given up and drank. She did not taste it. He watched the column of her throat move and felt a ridiculous pang that might have been relief or the ghost of some other thing that had died in him on a road, under a tree, by a river. "You have saved me," she said, when she had finished drinking the first cup and begun the second. The tone was not gratitude. It was merely a listing of the world's contents now, in order of importance. "For today," Jaime said. "For today," she agreed, too quick for that to have been her first thought, too quick for it to have been anything but the thought she had tried not to touch because it was hot. "They will not let this stand, you know. He will smile. He will bless. He will send his pale boys to wash the steps again. And then he will find some word, some ink that eats what it is put upon. He will have to be cleverer than he has been," Jaime said. "The law is an old dog. It sleeps with a bone between its paws and wakes when you try to take it away. Then he will hamstring the dog," Cersei said. "We will have to make him bleed first." "We?" Jaime asked, not soft, not loud, merely curious about what her mouth would do. She set the cup down and came to him. He could smell the salt on her skin beneath the sweet. She put her hand to the gold, palm against it as if she could feel through it and find his stump and lay her fingers around that. "Do not be peevish," she said. "Do not be common. The city has eyes. The city will be speaking. We will be speaking louder. Qyburn will not need to breathe so hard when he thinks of what he has made in his below stairs. Kevin will huff. Mace will swell. The Tyrell girl will smile and pet my son like he is a spaniel. We will be louder." "We will be louder," Jaime repeated, though the appetite for shouting had never been his. A knock came at the door. It was soft enough that it might have been a mouse. Only mice do not wait for the silence they make and then knock again. Adam went to it and opened, and Kevin stood there with his hand on the latch and his mouth tight as a man who has bit down on a nettle and refuses to spit. "Cersei," he said. "Nephew." "Uncle," she answered sweetly. "Did you pray for me?" "I prayed for the city," Kevin said, "and for sense. I see that one prayer has been answered and the other not." "Sense?" Cersei laughed, and there was a chime of the girl in it, cruel and bright. "Sense would have been to send a monster. I sent a man. The city loves men. Ask them. They were very noisy about it." "They were noisy because they thought they would see blood," Kevin said. "They did not. Do not think you have given them what they wanted and so they are yours. The crowd's love is a bucket with a hole. You may pour wine into it all day and never taste any yourself." He glanced to Jaime. "You moved well." "I moved," Jaime said. "We will need to move more." "You will need to move less," Kevin replied, and his eyes went to Cersei again with the old mixture of love and exasperation that close kin are cursed with. "Come back to the keep, niece. Be seen with your son. Be quiet for as many hours as you have breath for. Let those who want to test the law test it where I can see them." His jaw bunched. "Do not let Qyburn near you with his leeches and his whispers." "He is a maester," Cersei said. "He is a—" Kevin bit the word off because he had never been a man to waste spittle. "It does not matter. Leave him be for one day. One." He looked at Jaime. "Can you keep her in hand so long?" Jaime did not answer with words. He let the gold tilt toward Cersei's hip and felt her heat through the sleeve and knew she hated that and loved it. Kevin snorted. It might have been a laugh that had grown bones and taken to walking awkwardly. They went then, a procession that might have been a victory and might have been an attempt not to look like something else. The square still smelled of trampled sand and breath when they crossed it. The steps of the sept glittered with water. A child broke from the crowd and held out both hands as if to bless Cersei, and a warrior's son stopped him with the gentlest touch Jaime had ever seen put between two enemies. Men and women were already telling their version to each other as if by speaking first a person could claim a patent on events. He yielded like a girl, he was brave as any knight. The Lannister cheated with that hand. The Lannister's hand is a marvel. The gods spoke, the gods were mocked, the gods are weary. The gods are a tale told in a tavern to make fools spend. Back within red stone, doors were shut and the sound of the city collapsed like a tent whose pole has been withdrawn. Tommen was there, red-eyed and trying not to be, and he flung himself at his mother as if the boy he had been had stolen back into him through the keyhole. Cersei stiffened because she had not prepared for this weight, and then she gathered him, made a cradle with her arms for a body that was almost too big for any cradles, and murmured nonsense that filled the air between their faces and made them private. Jaime stood apart. Marjorie appeared as if distilled from perfume and quick wit, all white and rose, and she took Tommen's hand without needing to take it because the boy gave it without looking. Her eyes flicked to Jaime and then to Cersei, and she smiled, not with her mouth. One of her cousins, a Grace dame with hair like new straw braided with gold thread, hovered behind her, eyes peeled for places where a word laid now might sprout a favor later. "Praise be," Marjorie said softly, the words exact with the proper amount of nothing in them. "We are all relieved." "We?" Cersei murmured, and the word carried 100 knives in its pocket. "We," Marjorie said again, and if she felt any of those blades bite, she did not show it. Qyburn came late to the room, as if he had thought to position shadows in other rooms first and then collect the ones remaining. He bowed, eyes never leaving Cersei's face. "Your Grace." The silent knight kneels in the dark and listens for your command. He may kneel until his knees rot, Kevin snapped. Get thee to thy humors and your jars, if you must be useful, and send for Pycelle. The queen requires tonics and sober counsel. Pycelle is with Lord Tyrell, Qyburn said mildly. The Lord of Highgarden has a knee that speaks to him when the weather turns, and today the wind has shifted. But I can provide a draught to quiet racing hearts. My heart does not race, Cersei said, and it was almost true, because rage and triumph do not quicken the heart so much as change its mind. I require a bath, hot and proper attendance, and a dress that says queen when it walks into a room, and meat. All of these can be had, Kevin said. He looked to Jaime again, the look of a man who knows where the rope is weakest. Walk with me. They left the chamber together, and the corridor that took them toward the hand solar was a ribbon of cool in the day's heat. The windows gave onto a view of the city that was all angles and roofs, the sept's crusted domes a lump of icing in the middle of a burnt cake. Jaime felt his shoulder complain now that the moving was over. Pain is a dog that does not come when called and sleeps on the bed when it pleases. He rolled the joint and watched the movement of his own flesh with detached interest, as if it belonged to a stranger. You did the right thing, Kevin said abruptly. He did not look at Jaime. For the wrong reasons, I do not care, but you did it. What reasons do you think I had? Jaime asked. The ones you always have, Kevin said. The ones that begin and end with your sister. Not all the way, Jaime said. He surprised himself again. There was a boy. He did not deserve to be a martyr for another man's sermon. Kevin made a noise that might once have been a laugh when it was young and had sired many thin children. No one deserves it. It is the one thing we give men without asking whether they deserve it. He stopped at a window and stared out and down. This will not be done, he said in a voice that was almost kind. You know that. I know, Jaime said. The sparrow will write the law in a new hand if the old hand displeases him. Kevin went on, counting the things the way a quartermaster counts cups. He will say that the gods must not be mocked. He will say that the queen's sins require a different weight of justice than the common woman's and that the scales must be adjusted. He will say he wishes only to protect the realm from the fragility of men's honor and the vagaries of fate. Men will nod. Men always nod. If you make them sound like children who are being told a bedtime story. Will he move against Tommen? Jaime asked, because the thought had been there since morning, crouched and patient. Not while the Tyrells hold him by one hand and your sister holds him by the other, and those hands are still attached to arms that will swing, Kevin said. But he will stand near, and when one hand lets go, he will have his fingers there already. They moved again. In the hand solar, Pycelle was indeed absent, and the place smelled of quills and warm wax. A scribe dozed in a corner with a pen stuck behind his ear and a smudge of ink on his lip where he had worried it in his sleep. Kevin nudged the man's foot with his boot, and the scribe came to himself with a start and a babble, and then fluttered out like a roused hen. Kevin stood where the light fell and made the dust visible, motes turning in their millions. He looked old to Jaime in that light, not in the way of men who have failed, but in the way of men who have held too much of other men's failures up in their hands and stared at them as if they could learn a better trick by looking. Watch her, Kevin said. Keep her from lighting the wrong fires. I am not sure I can keep her from lighting any, Jaime answered. He let himself lean against the table because the wood was real and had 4 legs, and that seemed necessary to him suddenly, to be near a thing that would not tell lies about itself. She will want to take the faith apart brick by brick and make Qyburn build a stable out of the pieces. She will want to drag Marjorie through the streets and then complain that shoe leather is dear, Kevin said dryly. She will want to forget that the city loves a show better than it loves a sovereign, and that the last time she gave it a show it learned to throw stones with both hands. He sighed. I will try to hold her. You hold the boy. Between us, perhaps we can keep a kingdom in its clothes for a month. A month, Jaime thought. Sometimes the scale of days is too large. Sometimes it is too small. The gold shifted when he put his hand upon the edge of the table, and the leather within pressed the stump, and the phantom fingers pricked, and for a ridiculous instant he wanted to laugh, because 10 years ago he had thought a month could be counted by kisses, and now it might be counted by lives put into boxes with their lids nailed down. In the evening the city tried to forget it had been a court. It did as cities do. It cooked. It drank. Coupled. It trimmed lamps and sat in doorways and told the day to itself in better words than the day had provided. The square before the sept filled again with people who had not been there at noon and wanted to see where a thing had happened. They climbed the steps because steps asked to be climbed. Children ran where their mothers had not let them run in the morning. A boy picked up a handful of sand from the circle and put it in his mouth because that is what boys do with the world, and made a face and spat and laughed because his sister laughed at him. The warrior's sons kept a sullen ring around the doors, and one of them sang, softly, under his breath, a hymn about the stranger that had too many verses. He did not make it to the end. Jaime ate little and drank more than was likely wise, enough to put a blur on the gold's ache and a gloss on memory. Cersei held court, if court is what you call it, when men who fear you come and say they love you, and women who envy you come and say they adore you, and you do not need to know the difference because both tastes are the same on the tongue. Tommen sat at her side and kept hold of the arm of the chair and tried to keep his eyes open. Marjorie encouraged him to bed when the hour allowed her to do so without being called impertinent. Qyburn drifted as he always drifted, like smoke that cannot decide which rafters to decorate. When the crowd thinned and the candles guttered down and the keep found itself in the hour when all the things men have said in it flowed about without owners, Jaime went to the yard again because the habit was in him now, and he could not sleep without hearing wood against wood and feeling the sweat pour and the night cool it in little draughts. Ser Island was there before him, as if drawn by the same magnet that pulled iron through breastplates. They moved. It was different in the dark. The sound carried along the walls and came back with an echo that put ghosts in the strokes. At one point Jaime caught the old knight's blade on the rim with a ring that made his teeth ache, and when they broke apart Island showed his gray mouse teeth and made a peculiar gesture with two fingers that Jaime chose to read as you will live another day and then another. He slept, and in his sleep he was a boy again, and he and Cersei were the same person, and he did not know which parts belonged to whom. He woke before dawn and listened to the keep breathe, to the small scurry of little things in walls, to a guard changing his stance outside a door, to the particular silence that comes with watched corridors. It had rained for a little while in the night. The air had been slicked and then dried, and it smelled like pages that had been laid out to keep from curling. He dressed and went out. King's Landing in the gray before sun is the city truest to itself. The shops have not yet put on their faces. The beggars have not yet been kicked into their places. The courtesans have turned to girls with bad tempers and aching feet and found their own beds. Jaime walked a lane that was too narrow for two men and then a square that was too empty for the hour, and saw the shadow before he saw the man. A hooded thing that slipped from an alley to cross his path and would have passed if he had not stopped, if he had not been himself, if the gold had not made a soft sound where it touched his hip. "You," Jaime said, because he knew the shape even in a cloak and the smell of the powder that he used to keep the old stink from clinging to him. "Varys." The man paused. He drew the hood back with a hand that had never known callous and smiled the smile of a man who takes pride in having a face no one can describe after seeing it.
"Ser Jaime, e murmured."
How reassuring. The city abounds in swords. Very few of them are attached to men who listen. "I do not listen," Jaime said. "I hear what I must." "Which is to say, you listen," Varys replied. He cocked his head the way a bird does when it has noticed a worm that may be a twig. "You moved in the circle as if it were a bed you knew. How comforting for the queen." "The queen sleeps well tonight," Jaime said. "Is this what you came to ask?" "I came to offer a little truth," Varys said. "The kind that men dislike because it is ugly and very difficult to dress. The faith will not be satisfied. The Tyrells will not be satisfied. Your sister will not be satisfied. The boy will never be satisfied because he is too kind to be. The city will weep because it always does. I thought you might like to know what tune you are dancing to. It is nothing new. It never is. Speak your truth to Kevin," Jaime said. "He spends his days eating bitter things. He is hungry for more." "I shall," Varys said. and something in the way he said it made Jaime's shoulder itch under its shirt. "But I thought to give you yours first because you have something the others lack. You have loved someone other than yourself. Once. You have a chance to do it again. Save your stagecraft," Jaime said, more roughly than he had intended, because the dawn had come and he was not yet clothed for it. "If you mean to do mischief, do it. If you mean to do good, do it elsewhere." "I will take that under advisement," Varys said, and slid away into the alley as if he were a shadow aroused and now choosing a new wall to sleep upon. He left behind him a smell of damp silk and a little unease, like sand in a shoe that a man cannot shake out because the day does not permit the time to take off the shoe. By noon, the city pretended that the trial had been a century ago. By noon, the High Septon's boys had been sent to scrub again where no one had walked. By noon, words had been composed with care by men who never let the truth go out in its shift and were delivered to the corners of the city where truth might be overheard in better clothes. That afternoon, the High Septon sent a letter to the Red Keep, written in a hand that was neat and old, and it said with all gentleness that while the gods had deigned to turn their faces toward the Queen's plea, the faith could not in good conscience forget the mountain of sin that had been piled in the city's midst, and that mercy could not be a door left open for wolves. It asked, so politely that the words bowed on the page, whether the Queen would consent, in the spirit of piety and gratitude, to a short period of devotion within the mother's house, a retreat from the world that would show all people how humility becomes a crown. Cersei read it and ripped it in 4 and then in 8 and then in dust, and then told Qyburn to take the dust to the kennels and feed it to the dogs so that the letter might end where it belonged. Kevin had another copy in his hand before the dust settled and said that perhaps a day in the Sept would be a small price to pay for the word mercy, which weighed more in the city than he liked. "I will not go back into that house," Cersei said low, in the voice of a woman telling a child not to touch a brazier. "Not until I choose what to burn in it." "They will not bend," Kevin said. "They will simply wait." "Let them," Cersei said, and smiled the smile of a girl who has found the door out of her governess's chamber unlocked and knows where the kitchen keeps the sweets. That night, men moved with purpose under the keep. Jaime felt it rather than knew it. He walked the corridor that ran past Qyburn's places, and the smell there was thick and moist and had a meatiness in it that made the back of his tongue try to retreat. He did not go in. He had no desire to see what had been done to a name he had once said with contempt and then with a certain reluctant pity. He went out instead and walked the walls where the wind tried to be a river and failed and was wind again. The city crouched under him and pretended to sleep. Lights came and went in the warrens. In the far distance, the Blackwater made its small, patient noises. He thought of the circle. He thought of Lancel's eyes changing as a man's eyes change when he decides to keep his life after all. He thought of Cersei's hand upon the gold and of the part of him that had wished her to touch what was left and know it. He thought of Brienne's blue gaze, the cleanness in it that had nothing to do with innocence and everything to do with not lying when there was no profit in it. He thought of Tommen chewing the inside of his lip so hard it bled and not crying because the boy had found the shape of a king that afternoon and had held it in his little fist like a toy he was not sure he was allowed. He did not sleep early. He slept finally. He woke to the sound of feet running. It was a thin patter at first, the way mice run inside walls when they think cats are elsewhere. Then it gathered itself and became many small feet, and then larger ones, and then a voice, cut off like a thread. Jaime was up before someone reached his door. The man was one of Kevin's, a square fellow with a good head for numbers and a poor one for lying, and he said, breathless in the doorway, "My lord, you must come. There has been..." The word hung. Men try to find words for the dark things, and the words they find are all too simple. Jaime took his belt and buckled it as he walked. The corridor was full of running now. The keep makes small sounds always. It had learned to breathe and murmur to itself over centuries. Now it spoke another language, the one castles speak when the old plan has been disturbed. They took him to the hand solar. The door was open. A lamp lay on its side, its oil spent, the wick black and small smoke wringing itself out of it. The smell of blood was not large. It was neat, a line written by a meticulous student. Kevin lay where he had tried to rise and not managed it. Pycelle lay near the door with his beard full of ink and his mouth open around a word. He had not been able to spit before his throat forgot how to work. The window stood half an inch ajar, a courtesy offered to the night. There were other signs, small ones. The tip of a child's shoe print on a stool, the smudge of dirt where a little hand had steadied itself against a shelf, and Jaime crouched because the world had lowered itself and he had to be closer to it to see. "Fetch the boy," he said, and his voice sounded to him as if it belonged to his father's mouth, as if it came from a room that he had thought burned and buried. "Fetch Tommen, and do not tell him everything until he is sitting down." Qyburn arrived as the chamber filled with the wrong sort of people, the ones who know how to inventory an ending and the ones who know how to define one. He looked around with the expression of a gardener shown a frost-blasted bed. "A pity," he said, and meant it, which made Jaime's stomach turn. "Keep your pity," Jaime said. He put a hand on the table, flat, the gold cold and the flesh hot, and he felt, in the weight of his palm and in the way the wood did not give, the same need he had felt in the circle to make the ground true beneath him. "Close the doors, close the mouths. We will mourn them at the hour for mourning. Now we will keep a city." He thought of Varys and of the dawn and of the little unease that had been sand in his shoe. He turned that unease over with the toe of his mind and watched it become something else. Little footsteps, old man blood, gentle hands doing an ungentle thing. He did not have time for the thought. He did not have time for any thoughts except those that could be stacked and tied and carried. He gave orders because orders are the one form of speech that turns air into a wall when it is needed. They obeyed. The city, which has its own brain and its own terrible patience, listened for a different noise and, not hearing it yet, waited. He slept not at all and in the morning sat with Tommen and told the boy slowly what had been taken. Tommen cried as boys cry when they are allowed to. Then he was very still for a long time, and when he lifted his head he said, "What should I do?" And Jaime said, "We will do it, because some burdens are too big to be set upon a child even if he is a king." Marjorie came and put her hand where it belonged, upon the boy's, and did not say anything for once. Cersei came and looked at the empty place where Kevin would have stood, and her mouth folded in upon itself, and he knew by that folding that she had found in herself the old reason to set fire to a thing, that reason being that it was there and it disobeyed her. "What will you do?" she asked, and for once there was no command in the question. There was only need, and she had covered it in as much silk as she could find. "Hold until we know where to strike," Jaime said, "and when we strike, strike once." She nodded as if it were a plan that had married her. Qyburn coughed a decorous cough and murmured, "The man who did this loves the sound of silence. He will make more places where silence can be heard, if we allow it." "We will not," Jaime said. In the days that followed there were letters upon letters, meetings that reproduced themselves like mushrooms after rain, and the smell of tallow thick in all the places where men like to imagine themselves wise. The High Septon spoke from the steps and said the proper words for the dead twice, and then spoke improper, more useful words about the living and how they might be improved by piety. The Tyrells withdrew into themselves to count men and loaves. The city found a new rumor every morning and slept with it at night. The circle before the sept was swept clean of every grain of sand, and still people wandered to it and stood, as if by standing there they might be taller than they were elsewhere. Jaime's shoulder healed in that same slow way that shoulders will when they have been asked to do more than they were promised. Lancel returned to his brethren and went about his tasks with a quiet that was not that of a man humiliated, but that of a man who has decided to spend his life in small coins rather than in one gold piece. Once Jaime passed him in a narrow arcade under the sept, and their sleeves brushed, and Lancel nodded to him as a son nods to an uncle he is wary of loving. Jaime nodded back, the way a man nods to a priest who has confessed to him what he should not have known. They did not speak. They had used all the words permitted them and none that were not. At night, Jaime trained. By day, he watched. He went down sometimes into the city in a cloak that would make him forgettable to men who saw one too many cloaks to catalog them, and watched bakers curse their ovens and children throw stones at a rat, and a man sell pins for wives to put in their hair. There is no better place to measure the health of a kingdom than at a pinseller's table. He saw more Tyrell armsmen than he liked and more ragged boys with rope belts than he could comfortably ignore. He saw the mothers' doorways full of women with small babies and older girls and wondered which of them would turn a little and then a little more until she had turned into a weapon. It was an odd peace, the kind that grows like mold in the dark when the kitchen is left to itself too long. It did not last, of course. Peace does not. It cracked one morning when a bell rang not from Baylor but from the direction of the Street of Looms. A shrill tinny bell that had belonged to a dyer and had called men to turn a vat. The sound of it was wrong. It was a summons the city understood too easily. Called not to work but to gather. Jaime was in the yard. He heard it and he felt all the men who would have been happy to look to their captains look instead to the walls. He went out and up and looked down and saw a knot forming where men believe grievances can be cooked into something edible. A company of the faith's poor, rope-belted and righteous, had stopped a wagon bearing Tyrell livery from the river and were insisting that the onions be counted for the mothers' kitchens before any should go to a high-garden stew pot. The driver had the look of a man who has been told he is cousin to a great lord and has believed that this will protect him from other men's belief. He argued. The knot thickened. The air changed its mind and decided it would be hot by noon. A thing began then that could have been pushed into a gutter easily by half a dozen men with sense and water, and because those men were elsewise engaged with their own small fires, it was not. By the time Jaime reached the street, the wagon was on its side, and the onions were rolling in a stink that made men's tempers climb whatever ladders were to hand. He went into it with a voice trained on other people's voices and made himself a wedge. He put his hand up, flesh, not gold, and took the wrist of a man who was about to make himself a murderer with a cobble and said, "No." And the man stopped because some words spoken in a certain key make men children and they obey without learning why. The warriors' sons who had started the quarrel did not back down. One of them said, "The poor must eat," with a righteousness he had borrowed from a man who had never carried a sack. One of the Tyrell men said, "Not your poor," with a drawl that had been learned in a hall with polished floors. Jaime said, "The king's poor," because the phrase can be laid over many grievances like a blanket laid over a heap to make the room look neat. It almost worked. It did not entirely. Voices were still up when he stepped back and then forward again, and when the first stone came, it came from a boy with nothing to eat and nowhere to stand, and he threw because he wanted to see something break. It is a simple thing to break a peace. It is much harder to tell stories to a crowd that keep it from wanting anything more than the story you offer. Jaime could feel the city shifting under him like a horse under a rider's wrong weight. He could feel the day taking its breath in and preparing to shout. He felt, ridiculously, the absence of the lime tree where shade might have made men cooler by little scraps, and that might have been enough. Then a new sound cut across the noise. Metal on metal, not as a stroke but as a cadence. A slow 3-beat struck on a shield rim by the butt of a spear. The crowd turned because human heads turn when they hear the promise of order dressed as rhythm. Down the lane came men in black and gold with the lion on their breasts, and a man before them whose mouth was set as if someone had told him a joke about his mother, and he had decided to forgive the world for it later. Adam Marbrand did not lift his voice. He did not need to. He put his horse where it needed to be, and his men fanned the way men fan when they have drilled and been hit for not drilling enough. The Faith's boys looked, counted, and judged that the mother would forgive them for prudence. The Tyrell's men looked, counted, and judged that there would be other wagons and other onions. The knot loosened. The onions lay with their skins broken and their smell rising, a sacrifice to whichever god finds such offerings most pleasing. "Leave it to rot," Jaime said, for form, and helped push the wagon upright with his shoulder, for his back. "Every day," Adam said when they had walked the first 20 yards away and the sweat had begun to dry. "A smaller fight, and if you lose any one of them, the next large fight shrugs and decides it will show you how big it is." He glanced sideways. "You are a poor man to keep a city quiet, Jaime. You should be a worse man or a better one." "I can try to be dull," Jaime said, and it coaxed from Adam a laugh that rolled like a stone down a hill. He was not dull that evening. He went to the Queen and found her pacing in a room that had too many mirrors for safety, light leaping back and forth between them like an idea that cannot decide where to sit. "Do you want this?" she said without preface. Or do you want to pine for a cow's daughter until the city eats you with onions? He could have been angry if he had not been so tired. He said, I want the boy to live long enough to make one mistake that is not fatal. And it had the benefit of being true. She came to him and put her hands on the leather at his shoulders where the golden straps crossed, and for an instant they were almost as they had been 9 lives ago. 2 children who could not imagine a world that would dare say no to them. Then help me kill the men who would make every mistake fatal, she said, and he heard in her voice the old music, the one that used to make him do what she wanted whether he thought it wise or not. Help me cut the sparrow's wings. Help me pull the Tyrell rose up by the roots. Help me pull the little spiders out of the walls and crush them underfoot. Help me. He did not say yes. He did not say no. The city waited outside the windows, the sept a white hump, the river a black line. Somewhere the bell of the dyer's shop rang again, 3 times, to call men to turn the vat. Somewhere a rat found an onion and carried it away like treasure. Somewhere Lancel knelt and said a prayer that had more in it than the words. Jaime closed his one hand and opened the other and felt, in the 2 different ways those acts happen, that the days ahead would be a duel fought on boards that shifted in sand that remembered old footprints long after rain. He could hear, under everything, the small bright ring of steel on steel from the circle, and a voice, yield. He did not know to whom he would say it next. He knew only that he had said it once and meant it as mercy, and that mercy is the most complicated blade a man can carry.